My name is Charlie Henson. I'm at the 12th Armored Division Museum in Abilene, Texas. This is September the 18th, 2004. Today I'm interviewing Katherine Arenz. She is a wife of a 12th Armored Division participant, a veteran. And first of all, thank you for letting us interview you.
Well, you're welcome.
And I would like to know your parents' name, where you were born, and about your family when you were a child.
Well, my father was John Gorman. He was a Canadian. My mother was Lillian Grams. She was a school teacher who went to Canada, and she met my father, and they were married. So I grew up, my early childhood was spent in Canada, although I was really born in Minnesota. So I went to country school. My parents decided when my brother and I were high school age that they wouldn't be able to give us a good education out on the plains of Saskatchewan. And so we moved at that time to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I graduated from high school and went to college.
Okay. What year did you graduate?
From college, 1942.
Okay. And is this where you met your husband? Tell me his full name and how you met and the date you met and all the things you remember that first day.
Well, his name is Herbert Arenz, and I was working as a page in a branch library, a city branch library, when I was going to college. And he was an avid reader. And so he started coming to the library quite frequently. And then eventually he claims the only thing he didn't ever return to the library was his soon-to-be wife.
So how long did y'all date? Or did you date?
Yes, 2 years, a little over 2 years. And then I finished college in May 1942, and we were married in June. Then he was drafted in September and joined the 12th Armored Division.
Okay. What was your degree in college?
It was a Bachelor of Science degree with an English and Social Studies major and a library minor.
Okay. What was he doing during this time when he met you?
He was working for a news distribution company. And then, of course, when he joined the Army, that became his full-time job. And
did he join it or was he drafted?
He was drafted.
He was drafted. Tell me about the day that you found out that your husband was getting drafted. Oh, your to-be husband? No, your husband was getting drafted.
Well, he had tried to enlist and had been told that his eyesight was so bad that he would not be accepted. So when he got the draft notice, we didn't think this was for real. We thought, well, okay, they have a quota to meet, he'll go take the physical, and he'll be sent home again. Well, of course, it didn't happen. And so it was kind of something of a surprise. By that time, I had taken a job as a teacher in a small town near La Crosse, where I had graduated. And I continued to teach after he went in the Army. And on vacations, I would go either to Tennessee or to Texas, wherever he was stationed.
When he was enlisted, was he sent to Campbell then, Camp Campbell?
Right.
Okay. Well, how did y'all keep up relationship, and how did you deal with that separation?
Well, I wrote to him every day, and he wrote to me every day that he could. So when he was in this country, of course, the letters went back and forth quite regularly. However, once they were shipped overseas, it became an entirely different situation because the censors would hold the mail until any troop movement was completed, so that we wouldn't know, they would have no way of communicating back to us where they were actually going. And everyone had a code worked out, like ask about Uncle Willie if we're going to Germany, or ask about Aunt Grace if we're going somewhere else. And the censors knew that. So that they just simply did not forward any mail until any type of troop movement had been completed.
So when he, for example, when he was leaving Camp Barkley.
In this country, it didn't seem to matter.
Okay.
It was only after they went overseas that we had this long gaps in mail. As long as they were in the States and before they shipped out, we had fairly regular mail connection.
Did he get a leave between the Camp Campbell and Barkley to come see you, or what, did he go directly?
Well, he got his first leave quite soon after he went into the Army. In December, he went in October. In December, his father died. And so the Red Cross arranged leave for him to come home. So he was home. He had a week's leave, but they extended it to 10 days. Well, then, I don't recall exactly when the other leaves that he, at one point he was hospitalized. He had to have surgery, and he got a long pass, and I met him then. But I don't remember. It almost seems to me he did get a leave. They got a leave before they shipped out.
Okay. When you went to meet him, did you have to buy that ticket, or did the Army?
Oh no, I had to provide my own transportation. Okay. And that was not a good thing, because train travel, which is the only way I had to go, was very difficult. And of course, the troops got first dibs on the seats, and then troops with their families would get the next boarding, and then lone wives didn't count for much. So I had to, one time I was adopted by a soldier as his wife so I could get on the train. I had already had two trains go by that I couldn't get on. And so this fellow said, well, you want to be my wife? So we're getting on the train, and the conductor said, well, where's your marriage certificate? So I pulled out an envelope. He never looked at it, of course. And we boarded the train. But that time I remember I sat on my suitcase all the way from Kansas City to Chicago. There was no seat. And that's the way travel was at that time. You were just lucky to get on the train. And having a seat would be a real plus, but sometimes it didn't happen.
You never came to Abilene, did you?
Yes, I did.
You did? Okay, tell me about that.
I sort of did this thing in reverse. I taught school in Wisconsin in the winter. In the summer, I came down to Tennessee, to Clarksville. And the following summer, I came to Abilene, to Texas, in the middle of summer, and went back to Wisconsin to teach.
So you spent in Clarksville, were you able to find a place to live?
Yes, I found a room, no cooking privileges or anything. Had to go downtown to get something to eat. And I got that room because the lady who had the house was a school teacher. And she figured if I was a school teacher, I couldn't be all bad, even if I was a soldier's wife.
What was that about? Why was that attitude going on at this time?
Well, I suppose there were bad cases and good cases, and it's just like human nature, you know. So anyway, I lived with the child's family in Clarksville, Tennessee, that summer. That would be in the summer of '43. In the summer of '44, I lived in Abilene on Elm Street. And I cannot remember the house number. I remember the one in Clarksville, 66 Union Street. But I know it was in Elm Street, and it was a family called Green. And there I did have cooking privileges so that I could fix my own food. But I never was able to get a summer job because there were so many Army wives. And I was considered a transient because I was just there for... So I remember in Abilene, there was a drugstore quite close to where I lived. And they had a rental library. And I would go and rent a book for 2 cents a day. And then the next day I'd take it back, pay my 2 cents, and get another book. And I realized I probably wasn't very good for their business because I'm sure they didn't like to deal in 2 cents a day, but that's what it cost. And so I read a lot of books that summer.
And did he get to come weekends or during the week, or what,
Well,
did he have to stay at camp?
He
all
could
the time?
come, he would come into town whenever they were allowed off base. But I had a feeling that the general had it in for me because it seemed like every time I appeared on the scene, they'd go out in the field for 2 weeks. And there I'd be sitting, waiting for him to come in. And of course, he couldn't come in because they were in the field. But I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but that's the way it was. And that's the way training was, that they would be going out in the field for a week or 2 weeks, and I just wouldn't see them then. So that's when I did a lot of reading.
Did you have any social life here in Abilene, or contacts with the people or community or anything?
Several times in Abilene, I rode the bus out to camp. Wives, there were activities for wives. I don't remember what the name of the the department was, but they would have a busload of wives come out, and we would do exciting things like play bingo or something like that to keep us entertained, I guess. But there was not a great deal of activity that way. But
Well, did you receive rations? Was that rationing system, food rations and stuff, was that
No.
a part of the Abilene life?
no, actually I had an allotment from him as a soldier. And when I came down, I always bought a round-trip ticket because I wasn't sure I was going to have money to buy a ticket back to my job at the end of the summer. So I bought a round-trip ticket and then hoped my money would last through the summer. That I had, in those days, teaching was a 9-month job and you got paid for 9 months. Now, often the teachers paid on an annual basis, but we were paid each month. So I had to save enough of my allotment and enough of my salary that I could live during the summer. And sometimes it got pretty tight when I had to eat my meals out. So it was sort of an exercise in economy.
That's a sweet way to put it. How did you find out that it was time for him to leave Abilene? Or were you were already back in Wisconsin when they
No,
left?
I was here when they.
Okay.
Actually, I left Abilene early that summer, earlier than I would have had to, because they were packing up to ship out. So that we knew that was coming. We didn't know where they were going, but we knew they were shipping out.
What was that like, to be a wife of a soldier who was leaving?
Well, it was what we expected. We knew it was going to happen. And it was no surprise to us. Actually, we'd been married such a short time before he went in the Army that I didn't have the normal expectations of what married life would be. I knew that he was going to be a soldier, I was going to be a soldier's wife, and that was just what we accepted.
How do you face the fact that did you not ever think about it, or do you think about it that I may not see him again?
Oh yes, definitely thought about it. But there again, it was something you had to accept. And I don't think I ever truly came to grips with that. I just thought, he'll be back. I knew it might not happen, but I thought, well, it's kind of like I'll worry about that later.
Okay. So you go back home, and he goes. Was there any time you ever knew exactly where he was? Did you know he was in Europe?
Oh yes.
At some point you
yes.
did, I guess.
We knew he was. I knew when he was in England. I knew that he was there. I knew after they crossed into the continent. I knew that, not before they went, but after they did. And we had, and I don't know if anybody's told you about the V-mail letters. We had a form that we would write the letter on. Then it would be photographed and sent on microfilm and developed at the other end. And so what the soldiers got was a copy of the original letter that we had written, that wives or family or whoever would have written on this V-mail form. That wasn't the only kind we sent regular letters to, but supposedly the V-mail went a lot faster. I don't know if it did or not, but it was supposed to, because instead of this huge amount of mail, they would just have this little film that they would send. So, and I didn't keep any of those, and I'm sorry I didn't, because they're, and I would think there would be some of those in the museum here.
I think there are some. When you went back to Wisconsin, were there other young women who was in the same that their husbands were gone too?
Oh yes, my sister's husband was in service, and although there were not many teachers' husbands, because there were not very many married women teachers at that point. And I remember when I applied for my second job, this school board president said, ordinarily we do not hire married women. And I thought, yes, but you need a teacher. And so I was hired for that job.
Well, you know, I was thinking a while ago when you were talking about that, because so often I didn't know if that time period, they didn't want to hire married women. Why was that? Teachers or anything?
The jobs were supposed to go to single women and men who were supporting a family or might be supporting a family. And married women were just not part of the teaching field or of a lot of other job markets. It was during the war that married women got accepted into the labor force, and we just stayed.
Yeah.
But it just, up to that point, the teachers that I had in high school and in college were old maids. But,
so your life was probably a bit easier since you did have a teaching job and you had the allotment. Do you think it was different? Was it easier or harder? Or?
Most of the soldiers' wives I knew worked. Not those who were in Clarksville or Abilene, probably because there were not enough jobs. But, well, like the last summer, after the fellows were overseas, I, of course, couldn't follow. So I worked in an ammunition plant. I helped make rocket powder for the Navy. And it was an experience. I had never had any factory experience before.
Describe it to me. Describe it for us. We don't have this on anybody's interview.
Well, I went to the employment office to see if I could find a summer job because I thought time would really drag if I weren't doing something. And they said, well, all we have are openings at the Baraboo Badger ammunition plant. And I said, well, I don't know anything about that. And they said, oh, well, you don't have to know anything. You know, you just sign up and just take a bus down there and they'll tell you what you need to know. Well, Baraboo was probably 100 miles from La Crosse. And so I went down and started work and lived in a dormitory and ate my meals in a cafeteria. And we had to wear special chemically treated suits because it was a plant where nitro was mixed with the components to make the powder. Well, my father was very upset about this because he thought this was a dangerous job, making ammunition, and he did not want me to do this. He wanted me just to come home and stay with him and my mother. He did not want me to take this job. I said, well, Daddy, I can't sit around for 3 months and do nothing. Well, the first week I was there was an explosion. And 2 people were killed. And I hoped against hope that this did not get in the paper because I knew that he'd be very upset about this. But he never said anything about it, and so I gathered maybe it didn't make the news because it may have been one of those things that they didn't want one known. But we worked 2-week shifts, 2 weeks days, 2 weeks second shift, 2 weeks third shift, and worked 6 days a week. And that was somewhat near Madison, Wisconsin, and also near the Wisconsin Dells. So there, on days off, there would be buses that would go into the Dells, which I don't know whether you know about the Dells, but it's a resort area.
Oh, it is. Okay, I was going to ask you.
It's a resort area, very scenic resort area. So we'd go into the Dells, or we'd go into Madison, which is the capital of Wisconsin. So there were things to do that were interesting, and if I wasn't too tired, because it was the shift rotation caused problems with sleeping, and so I felt kind of like I was working in my sleep, which was kind of dangerous, seeing as how we were working with rocket powder, but we managed.
What did you do? What did you do when you did this? Did you have several jobs or just one specific thing?
No, I just had one job.
What was that?
I worked in what they called a drilling and milling house. And we had long sticks of rocket powder, and we had to put them in a machine, get out of the room that they were in, close the door, so there was this shield between us, and then we would push buttons and the machine would do its thing. Then we'd go in, take the sticks of powder out, put them on a tray, and move them down to the next process. And they were quite heavy, and we'd load them onto the cart, and then they'd be carried away. And there were restrictions. There could only be so many people in one of these houses at one time. There could only be so much powder because of the danger. And we had these beautiful uniforms we wore, of which fortunately there are no pictures. And they were chemically treated suits. We wore safety shoes. We had to wear gloves so that to handle this powder. And then we had to wear caps on our hair so that none at all was showing. We were completely covered. We were kind of like creatures from outer space or something, I don't know. But
did it take 2 of you to move these?
No, No,
Just
we,
one?
we each could lift, we could lift them in.
So were they were putting chemicals inside this around the powder, or
well,
encapsulating?
they looked like long sticks of black hard rubber. And they were, I would guess, maybe 36 inches long. And then they were shaped, they'd already been shaped when we got them. And the ends had to be milled off and holes had to be drilled in the ends. And so we had these two machines, the drilling and the milling machine.
Okay.
But my son, when he was, I suppose, second or third grade, came home on the 7th of December one day, or one year, and he said, "Mom, I know Dad was in the Army during the war, but what did you do?" And I said, "Well, mostly I taught school. But then one summer, I worked in the Ordnance Works, making rocket powder for the Navy." He said, "You did?" It was like I won the war all by myself, you know. He didn't know that teaching these 18-year-old farm boys in high school was probably a more dangerous job than doing the rocket powder for the Navy. But anyway, I don't think any of that powder ever got to be used in World War II because, see, that was the year the war, the month the war ended, or the summer that the war ended. So it probably just went into storage somewhere, I don't know. But he thought this was, the fact I had done this was something remarkable.
So then you went back and you taught high school then?
Yes.
Okay, and you taught English and social studies, or English?
Yes,
Or
mostly English. I think.
mostly English, okay. These 18-year-olds that really wanted to be in the war instead of being in your class.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So when did you find out your husband was coming back?
Well, when the war in Europe ended, we were afraid they were going to be sent directly to the Pacific. And this was rumored. But then, of course, as things settled down over there, they were put into occupation duty. And it was just sort of a matter of biding our time then. And unfortunately, it was quite a long time. He didn't get home until February of the following year. He didn't have a lot of points. That was done on a point system. And the men with children got extra points, and the people who had been overseas longer got extra points. And so it was a matter of waiting until your number came up with the points. Then after that, there was a problem with the ships going to one place and the troops going somewhere else. So he was in Marseille and the ships were in Le Havre. And then by the time they got new ships in, quite a bit of time went by. So he got home in February. Well, most of my friends' husbands had been home for quite a few months before that. So, but it was just a waiting situation then, and eventually it happened.
Well, how was he different from when he left and when he came back?
Quite different. I think the Army, well, made him more self-reliant, but in a way, maybe a little less understanding. I think we had to work on things, but we worked it out.
What battalion was he in? I don't think I've asked you. Which
493rd
tank?
Armored Field Artillery.
Oh, Armored Field Artillery. Okay. Okay.
Battery A.
So did he ever share much with you about what he went through?
Well, yes, I've heard that some soldiers didn't ever want to talk about it. But yes, he did. But I think I learned more as he started going to the reunions. And the fellows would talk to each other. And I think I learned more about what they went through after he got into the association and went to the reunions.
When did y'all start coming to reunions?
Well, our first one, I think, was in 1947. And I think it was in Chicago. But then we didn't go for quite a while because the fellows he knew weren't there. It was somewhat later that more and more people started coming. And then they started talking about the way things had been and how their experiences. And they started to look forward to it. And when the children are little, we had a son and a daughter. And when they were little, we took them with us to the reunions. Went to Myrtle Beach. I remember that was one that they really enjoyed. And Cleveland, and several of the reunions when they were small. And I think they enjoyed it.
What did he do when he came back?
He worked for a newspaper in distribution, as he had worked for magazine distribution. And then he was in the insurance business for quite a few years. And then finally he ended up as a civilian employee of the Army. So it was kind of full circle.
Full circle. And your children came, how long had he been back when y'all had your children?
Well, we'd been married 10 years when our daughter was born. And then John was born about 4 years later.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me about how did the war affect your life? Whether it was the rationing, whether it was what your day-to-day looked like, how did it affect your everyday life those years?
Well, mail became very important to me, getting letters from him. And the rationing never was a serious thing because I lived in a small town, or taught in a small town. And we didn't, I don't think we felt the full effects of it as maybe people in the cities did. It was, life was not really as difficult as a lot of people seem to think it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What have I missed that we haven't talked about that's important for you, for people to know about being an Army's veteran's wife?
After he came back, he didn't join the reserve right away, but later he did. And that meant then when the Korean War came along, he was called up again. And that was the point at which our first child was born. So he was in Korea when Mary Beth was born. And that was a difficult situation for me. But I had family who rallied around, and then he stayed in the reserve. And it meant that most of his vacation time then through the years was spent at a reserve camp. And so our vacations had to be planned very carefully. Excuse me. But it all turned out well because now that he's retired, we've both been retired, we've done a lot of traveling. We've seen a lot of the world. We've been over to Germany any number of times. And we've had really good life. I did go back to work after the children were in school, but I didn't go back to teaching. I went into library work, and I was at the University Library in La Crosse for 23 years before I retired.
When he was in Korea, what unit? What was his job? Was he still in?
He was in the intelligence area of the 3rd Infantry, and John Eisenhower was his boss, which is something of a distinction.
Yes.
So
So was he there until the ceasefire? How long was he in Korea?
that was a different operation in that they got to come home when they were rotated out. So when he came home from Korea, the war wasn't necessarily over, but there was a rotation system,
Okay.
so he got to come home. But we've also been back to Korea, so which was an interesting experience.
If someone were to get this tape in 50 years, what would you want them to remember or know, or some words of wisdom or experiences that you had as an Army wife?
Well, I guess it's a matter of just hanging in there and making the best that you can of the situation as it is. And keeping in touch. Now, it's much different now where people can call on the phone. We never, I think when he was in Korea, we had one phone call. And that was when he was in leave in Japan, and tried to get the baby to make some sound so he could hear her. But at that point, she wasn't interested in cooperating. So, but it's just a matter of, you make the best of the situation you can. And family is important, and my family was supportive. So.
Well, I appreciate your time so very much and experience, and I'm
welcome.
glad we have your husband and yours now
Yeah.
in the same
Now-
weekend.
Now, can we get tapes of
Yes,
both of those?
yeah,
Okay.
we'll get that.
Okay.
In fact, did I get your address? Okay.
Is it warm in here, or is it just me?
I don't know.